It started like a bad joke, the kind you'd laugh off with your buddies over beers. Hey, did you hear the one about the wife who cheated on her husband with a taxi driver? Sounds ridiculous, right? Like something out of a cheap adult movie or a trashy TV drama. Except this time, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't something to laugh off. It was real. My life. My marriage. My wife's. Let me back up. I'm Dan, just your average guy in his 30s. I've got a decent job in tech, account manager, not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on. I'm not a saint or anything, but I never thought I'd end up here, writing about this shit. I guess I'm hoping it'll help me process everything, or maybe it'll just serve as a warning for someone else. Who knows? I've been married to Laura for 6 years. We've been together for 8. We were good, you know. At least, I thought we were. No major fights, no screaming matches. I always thought that was a sign of a healthy relationship. Maybe that was the first mistake, thinking that just because we weren't yelling at each other meant everything was fine. Laura's, well, she's stunning. Everyone says that. When we go out, people look at her, and sometimes I'd catch a few stares that lasted too long. At first, it gave me a little ego boost. I mean, I was the guy who got to go home with her, right? But after a while, it started feeling different, like maybe there was something I wasn't seeing. We have one car. Not because we can't afford a second one, we could easily swing it. It's just that Laura doesn't like driving. She says it stresses her out, and I get that. So, usually, it's me driving her around wherever she needs to go, which has been fine. Well, mostly fine. I'd do the grocery runs, drive her to work events, take her out with her friends, that sort of thing. When I couldn't, she'd just grab a taxi. She seemed to prefer it, honestly, like she didn't want to bother me. But looking back, I should have paid more attention to how often she was taking cabs. So, anyway, that brings us to that day. I had a business meeting downtown. Nothing special, just another client meeting, but it was important enough that I needed to be there on time. I grabbed my stuff, headed out the door, and walked a few blocks to where we parked the car, one of those annoying city things where you can't park in front of your own place. It's a bit of a hassle, but we've gotten used to it. Except when I got to the car, the damn thing wouldn't start. I tried for a good 10 minutes. I'm not a car guy, so I just sat there, turning the key, hoping it would magically come to life. No luck. I opened the hood, stared at the engine like I had any idea what I was doing. Spoiler alert, I didn't. At that point, I was already sweating through my shirt, and I had no choice but to call a tow truck to take it to the shop. Now, I was running late. Real late. I needed to get downtown fast, and there was no way in hell I was going to make it in time walking or waiting for a bus. So, I did what I had to do. I called a taxi. And that, right there, was the start of the worst ride of my life. No such luck. The driver was one of those guys who loved to talk. You could tell right off the bat, the kind who saw every passenger as a captive audience. He had this greasy comb-over, and his shirt was half unbuttoned, like he didn't give a damn about looking professional. He grinned at me in the rearview mirror as soon as I got in, like he couldn't wait to start up a conversation. "Busy day, huh?" he asked, glancing at me through the mirror. I nodded, giving him a short answer, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But of course, he didn't. "Man, you wouldn't believe the stuff I hear driving people around," he said, his voice grating. "The stories, makes me wonder how people live with themselves sometimes." I barely acknowledged him, just staring out the window, trying to block him out. But he kept going, oblivious to my disinterest. "Actually, just the other day, I picked up this woman a few blocks from where I picked you up yesterday," he said, shifting gears in the conversation. "Pretty regular spot for her. She's a real looker, too." My gut clenched. That same twist of discomfort from yesterday returned, stronger this time. My jaw tightened, but I kept my gaze fixed on the passing buildings, trying to ignore the unease creeping up on me. But something made me listen. A few blocks from my place. It couldn't be Laura. It just couldn't. She's a stunner, man, he continued, not reading the tension in the air at all. I was actually hoping I'd see her again today, maybe catch her around that same spot. You know how it is with regulars. I gritted my teeth. Why? I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. I wasn't sure why I even asked. Maybe I just needed to know where this was going, needed to hear what he was going to say next. Some part of me was hoping this wasn't what I thought it was. The driver chuckled, like he was about to share some juicy piece of gossip. Oh, man, it was like something out of a movie. One of those pornos or something. I picked her up one day, just a normal fare, and I dropped her off at her place. No big deal, right? So I tell her the fare, and she starts digging through her fancy-ass purse, you know? One of those expensive-looking ones. She's digging and digging, and after a few minutes, she looks up and says she forgot her wallet. My stomach twisted even tighter. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The driver kept talking, completely oblivious to the fact that I was on the verge of exploding. So, I'm thinking, great, now I've got to deal with this. I was about to give her my number, you know, so she could call me and pay me later. I've done that before, people are usually good for it. But before I can even get the words out, she leans over and says, "How about I give you a blowjob instead?" The air in the taxi felt like it thickened. My hands clenched into fists in my lap, my knuckles turning white. I stared hard at the back of the driver's seat, trying to process what he was saying. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sick coincidence, some disgusting story that had nothing to do with me. But something about the way he was talking, the way he described her. I couldn't shake the feeling. Yeah, man, I was shocked at first, you know? Like, who the hell offers that as a way to pay a cab fare? He laughed, a disgusting, self-satisfied sound. But then she got all serious, like she meant it. And she looked good, man. Real good. So, I figured, why the hell not, right? I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. My heart was pounding in my chest, loud enough that I thought he might hear it. She was good, too. Best damn blowjob I've ever had in my life, he said, his voice dropping like he was sharing some sort of inside joke with me. And then, get this, afterward, she offers to fuck me. Can you believe that? She was so casual about it, like it was nothing. Of course, I wasn't about to say no to that. My vision was starting to blur with rage, but I managed to keep my voice steady, barely. What was her name? He shrugged, a lazy grin still on his face. Oh, man, I didn't care about names. Didn't ask. Didn't seem important, you know? I forced myself to breathe, even though every part of me wanted to snap. Maybe, just maybe, this was all some terrible mistake. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was just some random woman, some other wife who'd made the same terrible choices. But something in me needed to know for sure. The driver seemed to sense my hesitation, and that's when he said it, the thing that would change everything. Wait, actually, I think I've got a picture of her. You know, for the memories, he said, grinning like it was the most casual thing in the world. He reached into the glove compartment, pulled out his phone, and swiped through it for a few seconds. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want this to be real. But then he turned the phone toward me. And there she was. Laura. My wife. Sitting in the back seat of his cab, smiling at the camera like it was some kind of joke. Her hair was tousled, her cheeks slightly flushed, that same damn purse in her lap, the one I had bought for her birthday last year. It was her. No doubt about it. Everything inside me froze. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. My whole world shattered in that single moment, seeing her like that, knowing what had happened. The driver didn't seem to notice my reaction. He was still talking, still laughing, like this was just some funny story to him. But I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could see was that picture, all I could feel was the rage boiling up inside me, the betrayal hitting me like a sledgehammer. Without thinking, I lunged forward. My fist connected with his face before I even realized what I was doing. The crack of my knuckles against his jaw was the only thing that made sense in that moment. He yelped in surprise, his phone flying out of his hand, hitting the dashboard. I didn't say a word. I just threw the money on the seat, shoved the door open, and stumbled out of the cab, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking, my mind spinning, everything around me a blur of fury and heartbreak. Laura, my wife, had done that. And I had no idea what to do next. The business meeting that day was a disaster. Not that I cared. How could I? After what had just happened in that taxi, the last thing on my mind was work, clients, or contracts. I barely made it into the conference room, sat through the presentation like a zombie, and I couldn't focus on a single word. Every time I tried to concentrate, that image of Laura, my wife, smiling in that taxi, her hair messy, her lips swollen, kept flashing before my eyes. My head was pounding, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. The client must have noticed something was off. I could see the looks they exchanged, probably wondering why I was so out of it, why the usually sharp, composed guy in front of them was now a hollow shell. I didn't care. I fumbled through my notes, stammered out some half-assed answers to their questions, but honestly, my mind was gone. By the time it was over, I knew I'd screwed up. The deal was as good as dead, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered in that moment. I walked out of the building in a daze, my thoughts spinning out of control. What the hell had just happened? How had I gone from living a life that seemed so normal, so stable, to being that guy, the guy whose wife cheated on him with a fucking taxi driver? And not just cheated, but degraded herself, offering blowjobs for cab fares, like she was in some trashy porno. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all swirled inside me, and I didn't know what to do with it. But then, slowly, that anger started to harden. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was something else. Something darker. I wanted to hurt her. I wanted to make her feel what I was feeling, make her pay for what she'd done. I wasn't going to sit around and be the sad, broken husband everyone pitied. No, I was going to get revenge. She wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind racing. I replayed every moment of our relationship, every memory, every kiss, every fight. I thought about all the times she'd smiled at me, told me she loved me. It all felt like a lie now. Like everything we'd ever had was just an illusion. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. At some point, I got up and went to the living room. I paced back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Revenge. I kept thinking about revenge. But how? I couldn't just let this slide. I wouldn't. Then it hit me. Laura had always been image-obsessed. She cared so much about what people thought of her. Her friends, her colleagues, they all saw her as this perfect, put-together woman. She loved playing the part of the successful, beautiful wife with the charming husband. That was her whole identity, her whole world. And I was going to tear it apart. The first thing I did was file for divorce. Cold. Calculated. No warning. I wasn't going to give her the chance to explain herself, to cry and beg for forgiveness. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking there was any hope. I wanted her to feel blindsided, like I had. I wanted her to wake up one morning and find herself completely alone, with her entire world crumbling around her. I contacted a lawyer the next day. I didn't tell her. I didn't give her any hint of what was coming. I just started laying the groundwork. I knew exactly how to hit her where it hurt the most. I'd take the house. The savings. Everything we'd built together, everything she thought was hers, would be gone. I was done playing the nice guy. She wanted to fuck up our marriage. Fine. I'd make sure she paid for it. But it wasn't just about taking things from her. No, I wanted to ruin her reputation, too. I started thinking about how I could expose her. The picture the taxi driver had of her, I wanted to get my hands on that. If I could show the world what she really was, the lies she'd been living, I could destroy her. Every friend, every colleague who thought she was this perfect woman, they'd all see the truth. She'd be humiliated, just like she'd humiliated me. As I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the details of the divorce, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I was taking control. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not anymore. I watched as the lawyer scribbled notes, laying out the process, the steps we'd take. It was all so cold, so clinical. But I didn't care. This was war now. When I finally told Laura, she didn't see it coming. She thought everything was fine, like nothing had happened. She came home from work, talking about her day, asking about dinner plans, completely unaware that I was about to drop a bomb on her life. "Laura," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." She looked at me, confused, but there wasn't any of that guilt, any of that shame that should have been there. She didn't know what was coming. I handed her the divorce papers without saying another word. Her face went pale, and she stammered, "What is this?" "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice cold. "I know what you've been doing." She froze, her eyes wide, and I could see the panic start to set in. "Dan, wait, what are you talking about? What do you mean?" I didn't even look at her. I couldn't. The anger bubbling inside me was too much. "Don't play dumb, Laura. I know. About the taxi driver. About what you did." Her face crumbled. She tried to reach for me, her voice cracking. "No, Dan, it's not what you think." I cut her off. "Save it. I don't care what you have to say. I've already made up my mind." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, holding the divorce papers, her life unraveling in front of her. She thought she could get away with it. She thought she could cheat and lie, and everything would go on like nothing happened. But she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Revenge became my fuel. I had always considered myself a calm, rational guy, but after finding out what Laura had done, something inside me snapped. I couldn't be that nice, reasonable husband anymore. That version of me was gone, buried under layers of anger, humiliation, and betrayal. The only thing that made sense was making her pay for what she did. And I wasn't going to stop until I tore her world apart. The first step was setting the groundwork. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Laura was in shock when I handed them to her, her face pale and her eyes wide with disbelief. But that was only the start. She didn't realize it yet, but I was about to dismantle everything she held dear. I started small. You know that saying about how revenge is a dish best served cold? That's exactly how I played it. The first thing I did was drain our joint bank account. I knew exactly how much she relied on that money. The house, the bills, she barely looked at the finances because I always took care of them. So, one morning, before she even realized what was happening, I transferred everything to my personal account. Cleaned it out completely. Laura had no idea until she tried to use her card one day and it got declined. I got a text from her that afternoon, full of confusion, asking why her card wasn't working. I didn't respond. I just let her panic. That was the first taste of what was coming for her. Next, I started spreading the seeds of doubt among her friends. Laura was big on her image. She loved being seen as the perfect wife, the one who had it all together. She'd cultivated this pristine persona for years, but I knew exactly where to hit her. I started talking to a few of her close friends, casually dropping hints that we were having problems. I didn't say much at first, just little things to make them question her. Yeah, Laura and I are going through a rough patch, I'd say, making sure to sound just the right amount of vulnerable. It's been tough, but I don't want to get into details. Of course, that only made them more curious. People love gossip, especially when it involves a picture-perfect marriage falling apart. It didn't take long for rumors to start circulating. Laura had always been so careful about controlling her image, but I was slowly unraveling it, one conversation at a time. But the real revenge, the part that kept me up at night plotting, was tied to that goddamn picture. The one the taxi driver had taken of Laura, smiling in the back seat like what she'd done was no big deal. That picture haunted me, but I knew it was also the key to destroying her. I wasn't just going to divorce her and walk away. No. I was going to humiliate her the way she had humiliated me. I tracked down the taxi driver. I had gotten his name during that fateful ride, and it didn't take much digging to find out more about him. I didn't need to threaten him or anything. Turns out he was more than happy to talk. He didn't give a damn about Laura or what she meant to me. To him, she was just another notch in his belt, another story to brag about to his friends. He gave me the picture without a second thought. "Do whatever you want with it, man," he said, grinning like a goddamn hyena. "She's your problem now." With that photo in hand, I felt a cold sense of satisfaction. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but it felt necessary. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about taking back control of my life, my dignity. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I started with her work. Laura had this cushy job at a marketing firm, and she was always talking about how important reputation was in her industry. She'd built her whole career on being seen as professional, polished, and untouchable. So, I decided to send that picture, along with a nice little anonymous note, to a few key people in her company. Her boss, her HR department, a couple of her coworkers she was close to. I didn't include any details about what had happened, just let the image speak for itself. I imagined the chaos it would cause. Laura walking into work one day, completely unaware, until the whispers started. Until her boss called her in for a talk, holding that picture in his hand. The shame, the embarrassment, it was exactly what she deserved. She'd humiliated me, turned me into a fool, so now it was her turn to feel what that was like. But I didn't stop there. Oh no, this was just the beginning. Laura had her little social circle, all those friends she'd been so proud of, all the dinner parties and weekends away where she played the perfect wife. I made sure they saw that picture too. A few anonymous emails, a couple of well-placed posts on social media, nothing too overt, but just enough to make sure the people closest to her would start to see her for what she really was. The fallout was immediate. I didn't hear from Laura directly for a few days after the divorce papers and the bank account stunt, but I knew the whispers were getting louder. I could see it in the frantic texts she started sending, the calls I didn't bother to answer. She was panicking, trying to figure out what was happening. It wasn't long before she showed up at my door. It was late one night, maybe a week after I'd sent that picture out. I was sitting in the living room, a drink in my hand, when I heard the knock. I knew it was her before I even opened the door. When I did, there she was, standing on the porch, looking like a complete wreck. Her eyes were red, her hair a mess, and she had this desperate look on her face. "Dan, please," she said, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." I stared at her for a moment, the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but part of me felt strangely calm. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To see her broken, to see her face the consequences of what she'd done. Talk? I said, leaning against the doorframe. About what? About all of this, she said, gesturing vaguely, her voice shaking. The divorce, the money, Dan, I don't understand why you're doing this. We can work this out. I laughed bitterly. Work this out? You think we can just work this out after what you did? Her face crumpled, and she shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. But this is too far, Dan. Why are you trying to ruin my life? I stepped closer, my voice low, filled with all the anger I'd been holding back. Why am I ruining your life? You ruined mine, Laura. You made me into a joke. You betrayed me, humiliated me, and now you expect me to just move on. You don't get to walk away from this clean. You don't get to pretend like nothing happened. She sobbed, and for a moment, I almost felt something. Sympathy, pity, I don't know. But then I remembered that fucking picture, remembered how she'd looked in that cab, smiling after what she'd done, and any sympathy I might have had disappeared. This is just the beginning, I said coldly. You're going to feel what it's like to lose everything. I shut the door in her face, her sobs echoing through the night. The divorce was a massacre, but it ended exactly the way I planned. Laura's life was in ruins by the time it was over. I wasn't even sure if she'd recognize herself anymore. The woman who used to walk around like she owned the world, who always had everything under control, had been reduced to a shadow of her former self. I got the house, most of the savings, and half of her retirement. The court didn't care about the details of what went down. They don't give a damn about who cheated on who. But Laura? She cared. And everyone around her cared, too. The fallout was bigger than even I had expected. After the picture spread through her work, it didn't take long for the whispers to turn into full-blown gossip. Her pristine reputation crumbled overnight. She lost the respect of her colleagues and her boss. No one looked at her the same way after that. Sure, people might not have known the exact details of what happened, but they knew enough. Laura had always been so obsessed with her image, and I took that away from her. That was the real victory. The money, the house, that was just the surface. It was her pride, her reputation, that I wanted to destroy. And I did. Her friends? They all turned on her, too. People like to watch a train wreck, and she became one. The same people who used to fawn over her at parties, the ones she bragged to about her perfect life, they all backed away, slowly at first, and then all at once. No one wanted to be associated with the mess she'd created. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the scandal. The humiliation. She became a cautionary tale, a joke, a subject of whispered conversations at wine nights. I knew her well enough to know that, for her, this was worse than anything I could have done physically. She couldn't handle being the outcast, the one everyone pitted or laughed at behind her back. And me? Surprisingly, people were mostly on my side. When word started getting out that we were divorcing, I didn't say much. I didn't have to. I let people come to their own conclusions. The picture was enough to tell the story without me having to say a word. Friends, colleagues, they all reached out, offering support, telling me how sorry they were that I had to go through something like this. Even the ones who had been close to Laura didn't know what to say to her anymore. She was toxic. People distanced themselves, and I could see her world collapsing in real time. But as satisfying as the revenge had been, something changed after the divorce was finalized. Maybe it was the emptiness of the house, or the fact that I had nothing left to fight for. I'd spent so much time focusing on destroying her that I hadn't thought about what came after. My anger had driven me, and now that it was all over, I felt hollow. I couldn't stay in that city. Every street, every restaurant, every corner reminded me of her. Of us. Of what I'd lost, even if I was the one who chose to burn it all down. There were too many memories there, good ones, bad ones, all of them tainted now. I had to get out, had to start over somewhere new. So, I did. I packed up what I needed, sold the house, and moved to another city. A fresh start, I told myself. Somewhere no one knew me, where I could just be Dan, the guy who didn't have a messy divorce or a scandal hanging over his head. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. There are days when I wake up and wondered if I went too far, if I should have handled things differently. But then I remember how I felt that day in the taxi, when I saw that picture of her smiling after what she'd done, and the guilt fades. Moving wasn't just about getting away from her. It was about getting away from everything. The people, the places, the life I thought I had. I had to rebuild. It's a work in progress, but I'm getting there. Slowly. So, here I am, in a new city, trying to figure out what's next. I've got my space, my quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I don't have the weight of that betrayal hanging over me every second of the day. I'm not sure what comes next, but at least I'm not stuck in the past anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. It's been a hell of a ride, and if you've made it this far, I guess I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Would you have gone for revenge like I did, or just walked away? Maybe I went too far, maybe not far enough. I don't know. But I guess, in the end, we all have to deal with betrayal in our own way. Anyway, that's my story. Thanks for listening. Update. It's been over 6 months now, and life has moved on, but not in the way I expected. The whole process of divorce, revenge, and trying to rebuild my life, it's like running a marathon through mud. Every step forward feels heavy, and some days, it's hard to know if I'm even getting anywhere at all. The first few months after the divorce, I threw myself into work. I needed something to drown out the noise in my head, to keep my mind off everything that had happened. I got a new job, as I mentioned before, but the transition was tougher than I anticipated. I went from managing large accounts in a corporate setting to working for a smaller startup. It's not as high pressure, but the learning curve has been steep. New people, new responsibilities, and most of all, a new version of myself trying to figure out how to exist without the weight of Laura constantly on my mind. At first, I liked the change. The startup atmosphere felt freeing compared to the rigid corporate world I'd been stuck in for years. I got to work more directly with clients, help shape the direction of projects. But there were moments when I'd be in the middle of a meeting or talking to a colleague and, out of nowhere, memories of her would creep in. It's strange how certain things, a scent, a song, a casual phrase someone throws out, can transport you back to a time you're desperately trying to forget. I've had to excuse myself from meetings more than once just to pull it together. It hasn't just been work, either. The loneliness gets to me, even though I try not to let it show. After the divorce, I thought I'd be ready to move on, maybe try dating again, but that was a lie I told myself to feel like I was progressing. The truth is, I'm nowhere near ready. I signed up for a couple of dating apps, tried messaging a few women, even went on a date once, but it was a disaster. We sat there, trying to make small talk over coffee, but the entire time I felt like I was pretending to be someone else, someone less broken. The woman across from me was nice, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but think, what's the point? What's the real her hiding? It was a short date. I've come to realize that the scars from what Laura did aren't just about betrayal, they're about trust, too. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone the same way again. Every time I think about being vulnerable with someone new, I remember how easily Laura slipped into someone else's bed, how she didn't even hesitate. The lies, the deceit, it left a mark on me that I'm still trying to understand. In the midst of all this, I keep hearing bits and pieces about Laura. It's unavoidable. We still have some mutual friends, or rather, acquaintances now, and every now and then, someone feels the need to update me on how she's doing. They tell me she's struggling. She lost her job shortly after the divorce was finalized, and from what I hear, she hasn't found stable work since. Apparently, her reputation in the industry took a nosedive after the divorce and the fallout from the scandal. At first, I thought hearing about her downfall would bring me some kind of satisfaction. I imagined her losing everything, just like I felt I had, and I thought that would make me feel better. But when I heard she was living with her sister, bouncing between jobs and unable to keep her life together, I didn't feel anything. No joy, no relief, just emptiness. I guess part of me thought that ruining her life would fix mine. But that's not how it works, is it? There's no real satisfaction in someone else's suffering, not when it comes at the cost of your own peace of mind. I'm still angry at her. I'm still hurt. But hearing about her struggles just felt hollow, like it didn't matter anymore. I had already won the battle, but the war I was fighting inside myself wasn't over. There was one time, about 2 months ago, when I ran into one of her old friends at a bar. It was awkward, to say the least. She tried to avoid the topic at first, but after a couple of drinks, she leaned in and said, "You know, she's not doing great, Dan. She really messed up." I remember just nodding, pretending to care about what she was saying, but I tuned most of it out. The details didn't matter to me anymore. Laura wasn't my problem, and I wasn't hers. But there was one thing that stuck with me. Apparently, Laura tried to reach out a few times, not directly to me, but through friends. She'd asked if anyone thought I might want to talk, to have some kind of closure. Closure? After everything? That's the thing about people like her, they think they can wrap things up in a neat little bow and walk away. But I've learned that some things don't get closure. Some wounds stay open, even after you've done everything you can to move on. Despite all of this, I couldn't stay in that city. It was suffocating. Every corner reminded me of her, of us, and of what I lost. The move was necessary, like a form of escape. I needed distance, not just from her but from the life we had shared. I've been in this new city for a few months now, and it's been a slow adjustment. It's quieter here, and I've found a sort of peace in the anonymity. No one knows me, no one knows my story, and that's been the best part. I get to live without the weight of everyone's pity or judgment. There's still a lot I haven't figured out. I'm not sure when, if ever, I'll be ready to let someone else in. But for now, I'm focusing on the little things. Work, building a routine, finding a way to exist without letting the past drag me down. It's not perfect, and there are days when I feel like I'm just going through the motions. But it's better than it was. I guess time really does help, but it's not the cure-all everyone makes it out to be. It just makes things quieter. Less raw. And that's where I'm at now. Not healed, not whole, but maybe a little less broken than I was.